Okay, my recording started the moment you started the broadcast, so I have all that on my recording, but you use yours. Welcome, everyone, to Chiron and Aries, transiting through the third and fourth houses. Appreciate those of you who are showing up live on the call. And those of you who listen afterwards throughout the next few years, up to the next 8 years, that Chiron is in Aries. First of all, our housekeeping slide here at EAN. You can study with us 3 different ways. We have our free weekly audio podcasts. We have our astral library that you can subscribe to, 3 different sections or all of them. You can subscribe 1, 6, or 12 months, or you can do a monthly recurring that you cancel at any time. Leroy put a discount on. Leroy, perhaps you could come back on and tell him I can have 30% off on the astral library. Is that correct?
Not the Astro Library, no. On the forecasting webinars page. Remember we did Saturn and Capricorn. We got Jupiter and Scorpio in there.
Got it.
All of those PDFs are discounted just for a limited time now. We're gonna probably unroll that at the end of the month. Well, we are at the end of the month, so I'll keep it on for a few more days. So take advantage of getting your Jupiter and Scorpio or your Saturn and Capricorn PDFs, 30% off. Apply coupon code SATURN at checkout. And that also on the educational webinars page, we have an entire series on the chakra systems. So untimed, not forecasting, but educational webinars on the chakra series, elements and modalities, all those types of basic EA basics are also on sale using that same coupon code SATURN, SATURN, at checkout.
All right, thank you, honey. And of course, we also have our Evolutionary Astrology course that you can see on your screen as well. If you want any more information, you can contact us via phone or email from our website. All right, here's the dates that Chiron is in Aries from 2018 to 2027. Of course, it has retrograde cycles where it dips in and out, both back into Pisces and then back into Aries before it goes into Taurus in 2027. Now, here is a visual of the eccentric orbit that we have of Chiron. Chiron is the one in white. Its orbit actually goes within the orbit of Saturn, the yellow one, and its orbit actually goes outside the orbit of Uranus, the green circle. The center being the sun. So you can see how close Chiron will get to the sun, how far away Chiron can get away from the sun. And that orbit then creates this as it goes through the 12 signs of the zodiac. Chiron will spend 3/5 or 30 of its 51 years in 4 signs: Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, Taurus. It actually is in the sign of Aries just a little over 8 years. Different example, opposite, in Libra, it's only there a year and a half. And so you can, it's hard to, as we looked at with the part 1 series, Chiron in Aries with its cycles, it's very hard to discern when you're going to have the square or the opposition. It can vary widely with the squares by years, and it can vary 5-6 years, I think it is, with the opposition. You will all have the Chiron return 50-51 years, but its passage through your own chart will vary. These 4 signs is where you're going to have long transits. And of course, you get over here to this side of the zodiac, Cancer through Sag, and it'll move quite fast through your chart. Interestingly enough, as always, it will line up with whatever it is you are needing to learn on your own individual soul level. Briefly, the Chiron archetype, Barbara Hand Clow, she's the one who is known for calling Chiron the rainbow bridge because of its orbit between Saturn, individuated consciousness, and Uranus, individuated unconsciousness. So Chiron's work is to bridge that conscious and unconscious part of ourself. And with Chiron, that conscious part is trying to get in the body, be in the body. And then, of course, raise or expand consciousness. Wow, we try to stay grounded in the body. Who of us does not have woundedness with the distortion, woundedness with our body, with the distortion of the patriarchy? The unconsciousness, of course, is those outer planets. They've always been associated with the shaman, the healer, the ancient wisdom. And Chiron's always working to make that, help make those outer planets, not just Uranus, but also Neptune, Pluto, and as time goes by, Aries as well, making that more and more conscious within us, both the individuated unconsciousness and collective unconsciousness. Chiron is most well known as being the wounded healer. Where is it we have the wounds? And as we'll see in the next slide, it's not just the body, it can be spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical. And those wounds, there's something about letting go of the wound, letting go of the pain, letting go of the trauma, all the way up to including death. Chiron wants to bring the shadow, bring the wound, bring the pain into the light, into consciousness, so that we can release the distortion and heal back into wholeness. When we do that, we turn that wound or trauma into a talent and a gift. So Chiron has rulership of all the alternative healing arts, including astrology. You can see some of them listed on your screen here. Kairos means hands in Greek. So you can see how it rules the healing touch and Reiki or massage or chiropractic care, etc. Palmistry, looking at the lines in the hands to actually know. Another way to seer as to what's going on for you. Now, this is something that I have spoke about in the archetypes that I've been bringing into this Chiron series. I always thought everybody understood this. Behind every physical imbalance, there is a crystallized emotion. Behind every emotional imbalance, there is a mental imbalance or distorted thought. Behind every distorted thought, there's a spiritual imbalance or disconnect with source. So all illness starts with the spiritual disconnect that then leads to a mental distortion, into crystallized emotions that then condense into a physical manifestation we call dis-ease. Common example, anger relating to the liver. And liver disease can be unprocessed anger. In my alternative work of energetic balancing, we know that any cancer is related to bitterness that is unconscious and unresolved and connected to previous existences, past lives. Every physical manifestation has an emotional, mental component, and many of you might know Louise Hay's book, Heal the Body. She gives the mental, sometimes emotional component to a physical disease, the corresponding affirmation to heal it as well. So when we look at healing, it's the same thing. Anytime somebody has a miracle happen in regards to spontaneously healing some dis-ease, it really starts with, for most people, a deep spiritual crisis. You know, that letting go and letting God goddess and reconnecting with source in some way, and recognizing how we co-create with source. And that comes down to having us evolve into more positive mental attitudes, understandings, outlooks of our world, which then condenses down into emotional self-acceptance, emotional self-love, healing those wounded emotions that were crystallized, they start melting. And then it comes down to the physical release of the dis-ease, and the body reestablishes health within itself in some way. So as you are going through whatever house you have Chiron and Aries transiting through, try and look at it this way. Whether it's an emotional issue going on or it's a physical issue going on, try and go to the spiritual source and then move it through these 4 levels in this order to see if you can bring about an equilibrium. And an equilibrium in all 4 bodies: your spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical bodies. Now, Chiron retrograde in Aries is going to point to Libra. There's going to be an energy all the way through this transit direct, but emphasized when it's retrograde, of learning the healing art of listening and being able to observe another from their perspective so you can give to them as they actually need versus what you want to project. There's going to be a need for taking in the feedback from others. Others want to speak as well, and you want to speak, they want to speak. It's a two-way street, all right? It's helping us search for that fairness and balance in any situation that then leads us to a review of how we want to act in any and all relationships. I like to say Libra is not only the dating scene, it squares Cancer family and Capricorn work. So anybody beyond a casual acquaintance gets connected through Libra. And so Chiron retrogrades will emphasize the relationships in your life and how they need to be evolving and changing into fairness versus someone having power over and someone being powerless. The polarity point also will require us to ask for help when it is needed, and helping any wounds come into consciousness. You know, Aries is me, myself, and I. It is, I like to use the symbolism of the 2-year-old. You know, I can do it. I can do it. They can put the building blocks together. They want to try themselves rather than have you show them how to do it. I have a little niece. She's 8. And she has her moon at 0 degrees Aries. And we come from a family that likes to put together puzzles. And so we started with her very early on with, 24-piece puzzle. I could do it. I can do it. I could do it. And so we just had to let her go through the struggle and some of the frustrations. And then when she exhausted her frustration, Aunt Kimmy would start to work with her and start to teach her how to do the edges, how to put the puzzle pieces into piles of colors. So now she comes and says, Aunt Kimmy, help me. And we're making lots of progress with puzzles. We're up to, she's 8, and I think we're up to 200 or 300 piece puzzles. So, example. It's always there with Chiron and Aries, but it will be emphasized whenever it's retrograde, whenever you have it retrograde in your transit house. How does that polarity house where Libra is, it will signify how you want to ask others to help you. It can be how you want to help others as well. And of course, everything about Chiron is going to be reviewing and progressing healthcare worldwide. We're starting a brand new Chiron cycle in regards to healing in general. How are you going to be opening up to all kinds of different alternative healings in your world? And when we're wounded, of course, the anger, the rage, the aggression, all of the outbursts that have a tendency to want to come through when we can't process that energy. Now, Chiron in Aries, Barbara Hand Clow would always say that, no, okay, never mind, I'm fine. She would always say that Chiron is always the alchemy. It's the alchemizing process. I might know how to pronounce this by the time we get to the 12th house. It's an alchemizing process to the evolutionary journey of any planetary aspect. In other words, transiting progressed or solar arc Chiron will have that effect on any natal planets, bringing that natal planet into consciousness and helping heal any wounded distortions within that planet. In the same regard, any forecasting planets will have the same effect on natal Chiron. So transiting Saturn, when it goes over natal Chiron, will help bring Chiron into consciousness. It's a synergistic energy that will work back and forth just by the fact that Chiron is involved in the picture somehow, bringing healing into the picture, bringing an awareness that we didn't have of how that planetary archetype was distorted in some way. Now, as we're looking at whatever house Chiron and Aries is transiting through, we must remember that the forecasting planet was always related back to its natal signature. So as you'll see with our chart examples through all 12 houses, okay, we will look at natal Chiron because transiting Chiron in Aries will be having an effect on helping heal that natal Chiron signature as well. And that natal signature is going to be Chiron by sign and house, and the rulers by sign and house, and all of the aspects that will be made by Chiron, by the ruler by sign, by the ruler by house. All right, so there's a lot that comes into that. We'll see how our examples turn out tonight. All right, but again, forecasting Chiron, which right now, Chiron in Aries, through a transiting house, it's going to have an alchemizing effect on natal Chiron. It's always going to be working to heal natal Chiron. In general, as we talked with Chiron in Aries through the cycles, all through 2018, Chiron is going to be going back and forth between Aries and Pisces. So we have one more year of finishing up the Piscean wounds before we jump-start a new cycle into Aries. And so if we aren't addressing those Piscean wounds individually and collectively, we will recycle the wound. We'll recycle those issues forward into Aries. And remember how Pisces, Virgo, all the mutable modality will relate to the sadomasochistic distortions of our human-made religions. Guilt at our human imperfection, guilt linked to atonement is the victim, guilt linked to anger is the victor, the victim masochist, the victor sadist. So if we're falling into the victimization consciousness with the wounds of Pisces, then what we're going to bring into Chiron and Aries is a sense of unworthiness. We're not going to have the initiative. We're just going to collapse, give up, you know, on whatever the wound is. There will be a few where it's ultimately leaving the body, ending the lifetime. If our woundedness is on the sadistic or victor end of consciousness, then it's going to emphasize all of that Aryan distortion of anger and revenge and lashing out, fighting, defensiveness. I'm going to get you before you get me. So kind of remember this in general as well as you go through 2018 and forecasting Chiron in your own house, whatever it is. It's going to go back and forth, and there'll be some degree of, and you can go back and forth between the victim-victor consciousness. You can have both going on, but take some time, give yourself some time to review. How is the Piscean energy in your chart wounded? Because that will be part of this broader picture of healing as well. And so, as we're looking at your house transit, some of the questions to ask: what wounds, what wounding, what trauma needs to be made conscious? And where does that need to then be released? Giving it back to source somehow, invoking source energy to help you heal this wound as you become more and more conscious of it. How do you listen for feedback from the universe around these wounds and traumas? Emphasized when Chiron is retrograde. There will be inner feedback. Your own inner consciousness starts to speak to you, your own inner thoughts and messages. Of course, the outer feedback will come from others in the universe, and it can be a human feedback. It can be non-human feedback. It can just be observing something that goes on and it goes, oh yeah, light bulb, I get it. How do you ask for help? That Libra polarity when necessary. Again, Chiron and Aries, we're going to want to heal it ourselves, and we are ultimately self-responsible for healing it. However, we also have to know when to ask someone else to help facilitate the healing. That's Chiron's role. So the more we all learn to help each other with healing, the better we'll work with Chiron. How do I apply that self-healing process of SMEP that I talked about earlier? Spiritual, mental, emotional, physical, regardless of what level it's manifested on. How do I initiate new processes of moving forward in life? So that as I look at my wounds, at my traumas, at whatever's distorted in my natal Chiron signature and in my forecasting Chiron, as I get the ahas, as I make the efforts to heal, how do I then take that healing and turn it into the talents and gifts? How do I take my next step forward as a healer on planet Earth? How do I facilitate healing on planet Earth? Because in the grand scheme of things, we look at the archetype of Chiron, we're all meant to be healers. It's as simple as learning to love, intimately or broadly. It's as simple as wanting to have peace on earth. We're all healers, whether we do it in some way for a profession in exchange for resources, or whether we're doing it just in the process of living life and having relationships. There's the variety of healing talents is as varied as there are human beings on earth. Anytime you have questions, you're always welcome to type something into the Q&A board. Leroy will do his best to answer, or he will ask the question of me as we go forward. As we look at these house transits, it's not so much of trying to pinpoint every detail. It's more of trying to give general archetypes, putting them across. You can just, for instance, in this case, look at Gemini, third house, and a ruler Mercury, and think of any way it's distorted. That's a wound. And then think of any way in which it has a natural expression. That's the healing. It's as simple as that with the 12 archetypes. I just thought it would be more helpful to use actual charts, so I won't exhaust talking about it. We will spend more energy into doing the actual chart examples for everybody. Now, of course, if Chiron in Aries is transiting through the third house, we're going to have all kinds of mental health wounding. Whew, is that a buzz phrase right now in the United States? Thank you, international listeners. Let me back up. Third house and Gemini is the active polarity, energy moving out. Mutable or adaptable modality, means of acting, actions. And of course, the air element is the mental plane. So that mental health wounding can be all over the place with the third house. It can especially be an inability to be able to process through any trauma or wounding. Because, if I may, look at the Florida shooting that we just had. And, you know, we have a whole high school who has been traumatized and wounded from those who had someone right next to them get shot and die, you know, to those who were in the building, various degrees. And the whole issue is to provide the mental health resources to process through the trauma, to communicate it, to hug, to let them emote, to, you know, help them visualize the loved ones who crossed over being happy and whole in the bardos, in the spirit world, to visualize, you know, them being safe in their world. You know, we could talk about all kinds of therapies and tools that need to be able to go on. It all comes down to the ability of wanting to integrate yourself into being whole again, to integrate yourself into feeling safe, to in trusting the process of life, mutable modality, you know, to be able to think and communicate, all right, to go through living on planet Earth. When third house is wounded here, we get either fractured, scattered thinking, or we get circular thinking, what you would call that OCD, that obsessive compulsive disorder. And the healing then, instead of being fractured or going round and round, we learn how to be able to focus, to process, to move forward, to stay in the body, and 1 + 1 = 2, + 1 = 3, to just go forward. So Chiron in Aries through this house transit is really going to be teaching us new mental processes, how to think differently, how to move forward, how to communicate differently. It can have us searching out for some therapies that help us think new thoughts, and to think those new thoughts until we can ground them in our world. So there could be communication wounds that we have to learn how to speak up about, and learning how to share it, in a clear way, versus Aries just lashing out all over the place. There can be an energetic buildup with this Chiron transit if we don't know how to speak or if we're afraid to speak, and it will build up until an Aries explosion comes along. Not necessarily bad. Maybe it's what has to happen to get the floodgates of being able to communicate and speak to come out. There can be thoughts that, source has abandoned me. I don't know where God is. Third house Gemini is the opposite of ninth house Sag, which is being able to put that larger philosophical understanding together. And so Chiron's transit through Aries is going to be opening us up to new understandings of our beliefs and, cosmological principles. And one of the most basic ones is, just the affirmation, I am a child of God Goddess. I am a child of Source, and I am okay in whatever my own particular third house circumstances are in my world. So part of that healing is going to be metamorphosing the thought-feeling process. Metamorphosing the thoughts from the self-negative to the self-positive, and then bringing it down into the emotions and feeling body to have it change our world in some way. So we've got to initiate self-love emotions as well as evolve the mental self-tapes. It's almost interchangeable between the emotional and mental bodies. Can you change the thought to then feel better? Can you change the feelings? Can you reach for just a little bit better feeling? That can then have you evolve your thought process. It's okay if it interchanges back and forth, even though I talk about it condensing from spiritual, mental, emotional into physical. That, all the way through the process of manifesting, no matter which house transit, that emotional mental body can interchange itself back and forth. If it's easier to do the thought first, great, let the emotions follow through. But if it's easier to feel it first and then change the thought, great, either way. And third house, fourth house, as we work tonight, mental, this is where we want to do the thought followed by the emotion. Fourth house, and at the fourth house example, it might be easier for that transit to reach for feeling at peace, and then the thoughts open up and shift and change. It's, again, that emotional mental body is so interchangeable. This is not be all end all, okay? But we'll start moving into a chart example. I don't know if this volunteer will be on. There's a big time zone difference, and she was having a little bit of not feeling good. So if our volunteer is here, great. If not, we did have some more email conversation. Let me just check in. I'm going to take a drink. Leroy, comments or questions? Do I have my Leroy? I have a Leroy who's not feeling so good either.
No questions on the board, and I don't believe we have a a live volunteer.
Okay, yeah, she's over in Europe and emailed me and said, whoops, just too late for her. She's not feeling really good. Oh, let me go into this, okay? I had this at the tail end of this part 2 series. first, second house transits, we had volunteers in their 50s, and they had some real strong Chiron-Uranus oppositions. Just so happened that these two volunteers are 1960s, and they have the Chiron-Pluto oppositions, and they also have Chiron-Uranus oppositions, and they have Saturn conjunct Chiron opposing Uranus, Pluto. Some close orbs, you know, the orbs just vary a little bit. We'll look at the examples themselves. Just want to point out, 1961 through 65, Chiron opposed Pluto 11 times from 5 to 19, Pisces Chiron to Virgo Pluto. Both of these volunteers are past 1965, and I just want to point out how close the opposition orb still is. This is a volunteer from 1967. Chiron here is 26.5 degrees Pisces in the second house retrograde. Pluto is 21.5 Virgo in the 8th. So we have a 5-degree orb that is still quite active as an opposition. So that Chiron-Pluto opposition carried into the second half of the 1960s for a little while yet. This chart, we have a volunteer was raised middle class. And let me see if I got this right. Okay. Raised middle class with not much religion, even though dad was a Mormon and mom couldn't stand Mormons. It did create tension in the household. Has a younger brother, not really close. This volunteer is living over in Europe and has a college education in healthcare, and she ended up working for Doctors Without Borders over in Northern Europe. She did have some sexual trauma in college. There has been a variety of relationships and choosing dysfunctional partners. There was one major dysfunctional relationship in her 30s, and since then she has not had much dating or relationships. She did say also when she was younger there was some binge drinking for a while to kind of numb herself, shall we say. And also, as you can start to see here, this volunteer just had Chiron return last year, and she lost her puppy of 13 years last year, and she is still going through some grief around that. So, as I had said here, that we are going to start and bring in the Ho chart, and we're going to have some look at natal Chiron as we get ready to move into what the transit will bring in the third house. As you can see, Chiron in late Pisces, getting ready to go into Aries, finishing up the second. So she's still going through some of the things that we spoke about in our last class with the second house transit. And it will go into the third house. It'll go over Saturn 2020 into the third house 2021. So what I want to go through here to incorporate this natal Chiron signature is the fact that all of our 60s babies had Pluto-Uranus conjunctions. After 1965, Uranus was new phase Pluto. Here's Pluto over here in the 8th house with this Uranus at Pluto 21, Uranus 26. And so we still have a fairly tight conjunction here. Uranus has a really tight opposition to Chiron. It's only off a few minutes. But what I'm wanting to point out is Chiron is setting on the evolutionary intent of this soul. The Pluto polarity point, where the soul is intending to evolve in this lifetime. Chiron is activating it natally. Chiron is conjunct the Pluto polarity point, just past it by 5 degrees. 8th house Plutos have karma around intimate relationships. There's karma around codependency. There's karma around powerless, power over. When you have the Pluto Virgo generation in the 8th house, they are really trying to have an inner soul analysis to either step into their power, if it's from the powerless side, or they will learn how from the universe that they can't power over anymore. The Virgo, humiliations, if they've tried to be extremely controlling in order to feel secure. 8th house. The polarity point lessons are self-reliance. And when the polarity point is Pisces, you've got to have spiritual self-reliance, a reconnecting with source, in addition to creating the ability to take care of yourself. 2nd house, food, clothing, shelter, that self-reliance. So this Chiron signature in Pisces retrograde can tell us then that there's some wounding around self-reliance. There's some wounding around that spiritual connection to source. Remember, we talked about the 2nd house transit last class, that the ultimate resource is source itself. So there's a wounding around this, and there's a lesson in learning to recognize this. And Chiron retrograde natally means they are to throw off that wounding. They're to throw off any victimization consciousness that they're not worthy of unconditional love with source. Now, adding to this picture is the south node over here at 28 degrees Libra. It's retrograde. Of course, it's always retrograde, or retrograde 90% of the time, sorry. That south node in Libra is emphasizing the relationship picture as well. It's approaching a conjunction to the sun at 20 degrees Libra here. I'm bringing this into the picture in the fact that by houses and by signs, we have a lot of planetary energy in the relationship archetypes. And so we have lessening over here in the opposite side of the chart to have relationship with self. And one of the environmental conditionings that this volunteer had shared is, she always gets, let's call it healing arts readings, and there's a relationship coming, there's a relationship coming, there's a relationship coming, and it never manifests. And as I was looking at this chart, I'm going, there's so much emphasis here. Natal Pluto, natal south node. This soul is coming from so much relationship energy that there could be wounding in all this relationship stuff, sacrificing herself for relationships. And the lesson, okay, is to have her own relationship with herself first, and then to have that relationship with source. Pisces polarity, Pluto Virgo generation, you don't get any substitutes for God, goddess, whatever you want to call it. You got to have that. And as you deepen that spiritualization process of having Source as your best friend, having Source as your lover, then the humans will follow through. And one more time, this is going to be emphasized with this Chiron signature. All right. So as we're looking at this person just coming off of their Chiron return in late Pisces, this last year has been an opportunity for healing. You know, one of the things that EA teachings would say is when we come through a lot of woundedness in human relationships from the patriarchy distorting everything. I'm not talking genders here, just talking philosophies. As we come through that wounding, part of the healing process is sometimes it's easier to have the relationships with the unconditional love of the four-leggeds and heal that way to then go forward with the humans. I'm a Pluto in Virgo. I can definitely speak to that process, that energy. And yet, even here with this Chiron signature, this soul lost a four-legged. And I so know what it's like. I can't tell you how many four-leggeds I've released to the spirit world in this lifetime. A lot. And I've done 3 of them in the last 3 years. So been there, done that with you, sweetie. And so here's this loss of her puppy. And so Chiron, as it transited over and the Chiron return happened, again, it is emphasizing this need to deepen a relationship with Source. And to the degree that we fill ourselves up with Source, then we become whole again. Anybody who knows my teachings has heard me say, the relationship you have with Goddess is identical to the relationship you have with yourself. And the relationship you have with yourself is identical to the relationship you have with God Goddess. It's an inside job. So as Chiron transits through this last year in Pisces and dips back into, what is it, 28.5 degrees Pisces, I think it is. Hold on, I'll double check that one for sure. It goes all the way back to 28 Pisces. 2754 is when Chiron will go direct. So as it dips all the way back to 28 degrees Pisces, there still will be this lessening for her. Chiron new phase itself. How well can I heal? How well can I become whole? How well can I open myself up to Source? Another Pisces saying, ultimate freedom means ultimate self-responsibility. I'm not a victim here. There's no bad or good in this chart. It just describes what is. It just describes where my soul is at this point in its journey. Ruler of this natal Chiron by sign, Neptune over here in the 10th house Scorpio. The deep psychology of looking at where we are responsible for ourselves will help with this wounding. Ruler of Chiron natally by house is Venus over here at about 7 degrees Virgo in the 8th. That deep psychology again, 8th house Scorpio house, Venus being able to analyze as well. What do I need? What do I value? How do I have to take care of my own needs? 3 planets over here in the 8th house, wanting the lover to fulfill the needs. That's going to be this deep psychology of how, again, we've given ourselves away to others in relationships. And Chiron transiting This is the opportunity to recognize that and to come into that complete wholeness of how we love ourselves. So that Chiron in Aries, we take on that self-reliance. It's going to get over here to Saturn. We're going to take on that responsibility. Now, in regards to this volunteer's chart, I always draw up another chart that gives me all of the aspects in the way that I've used to studying it. I haven't put the asteroids into confuses, except that I did go back and put the asteroid in for this chart, because the asteroid Juno, the asteroid of relationships, is also in the 8th house, also in Libra, and really opposed to Saturn. And this right here is another one of those signatures, repeating signatures of all the relationship karma and codependencies versus being able to initiate responsibility for self and taking care of self and all of our needs in so many ways. And here are the 2 retrograde planets in the chart. Remember, Chiron between Saturn and Uranus, all right? Saturn is new phase, this natal Chiron. It's going, come on, this is where we've got to step up to the plate. And we've got to have some objectivity about these relationships. It's okay to yearn for relationships. This soul will have relationships in her future, whether it's this life or future lives, but to the degree that she takes care of herself here and meets all her own needs in each and every way is the degree to which then the relationship magnetism will be activated. Venus ruling this Chiron here, to the degree she remains wounded, the magnetism will be the neediness and the victimization. The degree to which Chiron wakes everything up and she moves forward, meeting her own needs, transforms this magnetism into self-love, self-caring. And if I'm doing it with myself, I attract in someone who does it as well. So now, as this Chiron then moves past that Saturn, hopefully activating that initiation into self-responsibility, Aries, transiting through the 3rd house, we can start to take all of those mental patterns and we can move Pluto Virgo away from the cup half empty to the cup half full. We can move Uranus and Virgo new phase Pluto away from I'm the victim and relationships always hurt me into going, wait a minute, I'm going to shift that thought pattern. I'm going to create a new affirmation. I'm going to create new processing. What can happen here with this Chiron transit if we remain wounded is you remain stuck in the circular thinking. You remain stuck in the old mental wounded thinking. We don't have the initiative to think differently. That Aries lack is foremost. And what happens is that Aries energy, Chiron wants to wake it up and go, wait a minute, damn it, I deserve love. And I can love myself. That's that energy that really wants to wake up with this transit. You know, by the way, guess what? The North Node, the ego that's trying to strive forward for this soul, is going to be activated as well, to the degree that Chiron in Aries through the 3rd can initiate new thoughts, can initiate new conversations. You know, Chiron in Aries was going to have all of us looking at new therapeutic processes, new therapies to try. And in the 3rd house, it can be as simple as communications. Depending upon our circle of friends, you can go up to your friends and go, give me some feedback. What do you think I should be doing differently in my life to love myself better? What do you think I should be doing differently in regards to attracting relationships? And ask for 15 different type, ask 15 people for feedback, or 5 if, however, whatever, degree of friends you can ask. Give them permission to give you honest feedback, okay? And you might start to hear a repeating theme that will then help this Chiron transit in the third house know how it needs to go forward differently with Aries actions, how it needs to go forward differently with perhaps some type of therapeutic work. I didn't say earlier in the health and wellness perspective, but what can sometimes happen with third house, and as Chiron transit the third house, in addition to it being mental, it can bring up all the nervous system issues. And it can be this person feeling, just getting all jittery and nervous because they're afraid to initiate Aries and do it differently. So this is a house transit in which the physical therapies of massage and Reiki and, healing touch can be extremely important, because if the mind is, in this state of nervousness, the literal touching can melt the mind. It can melt the emotions. It can help the body relax so that the mind can wake up. And the mind can have thoughts just spontaneously come in that will help with the moving forward, that will help with, a different outlook. So just as I said, sometimes it's okay to have the emotional and mental bodies, go back and forth. Specific to the third house, when you can't get the mind to shift, go right down to the body. As I said, no matter what level it's manifested on, you can ask, how do I heal this spiritually? Communications with source. What would you have me know, source? Tell me why I don't feel loved. Where are these feelings of unlove come from? Mentally, how do I heal it mentally? We've been talking all that stuff. How do I heal emotionally? Sometimes you might have to go through the emotional expressions in order for that third house transit to have the thought come through. And then specific to that third house and Chiron, ruling the hands-on arts as well as the other healing arts, do some body work. And that can really help with the waking up. Now, just like we had the first 2 chart examples, it just so happens that this person has 7 aspects to Chiron. Okay, and that's not even including the fact that, we could drag in Saturn. We looked at the Chiron aspects to Pluto and Uranus and how tight the aspect to Uranus is. And as we talked in the cycles class, which, we'll probably repeat most of these 12 houses, Chiron opposing Uranus, it's such an emphasis to heal trauma. We're at the ending of the Piscean age. Last 2 house examples, we looked at Chiron in Capricorn opposite Uranus in Cancer. Chiron opposed Uranus 41 times through, the whole half the zodiac. So you know, when you have a Chiron-Uranus opposition in general, you do not get to keep the trauma under the surface. The trauma is going to re-imprint. It's going to repeat and repeat to bring it into consciousness. Then you can either re-imprint or break free. This soul has Mars over here at 23 Sag making a T-square. And so there's some help. There's a relief from the opposition. You know, every time spontaneous understandings come along, Sag, intuitive hits, and we've got a 9th house Pluto and a South Node in the 9th. So this soul can access natural understandings, natural spiritual principles. Mars can help them act upon it. The 11th house will give Mars messages of how we need to move forward with our healings. The other thing that's going on is that there's 2 yods in this chart. We have South Node, and it's ruler by house Jupiter in a sextile with a yod to Chiron. All right, so there's some energy here to help with deeper spiritual understandings to the degree that the South Node in Libra and Jupiter in the 7th house can break free from codependencies. I'm not a victim in relationships. How do I attract it in? The moon, well, there's just to point it out, the moon at 29 Aquarius with the North Node have yods to Uranus, and they even pull in Capricorn because of the conjunction. So there can be some emotional discomfort from time to time to spark the 8th house psychological questions asking why? Mercury over here at 14 Scorpio in the 10th, conjunct the midheaven, is a waning sesquisquadrate, square and a half, to Chiron. Mercury's just past the aspect, so Mercury's moved from full phase to disseminating phase. Another emphasis to just deeply question why. Anytime a chironic wound, anytime this soul feels hurt, wounded, disappointed, unloved, whatever it is, you can just ask why. And Mercury and Scorpio can spark an understanding of how you need to take the next step in self-responsibility and meeting your own needs in every way. Transiting Chiron in the 3rd house will spark the thoughts spontaneously between this sesquisquadrate of Mercury to Chiron. Not only that, as Chiron transits through this 3rd house, remember we said ask for feedback? Mercury rules that 3rd house. People are going to show up and say, oh, by the way, there's going to be this astrologer using this chart as an example and going, here's, it really is about taking care of yourself. Ultimate responsibility will give you ultimate freedom. And when you can feel free, then everything melts. The depression or letdown of natal Chiron will lift. And then we have Chiron making a waxing trine to Neptune. Whatever efforts the soul will make and initiate, there's been a spiritualization process in healing prior lives. Chiron can get the psychological understandings from Neptune and Scorpio. You just have to be careful because you can be stuck in feeling lost in the physical world. You have to make the efforts to heal, to deeply self-love, Neptune ruling natal Chiron by sign. You make the effort, it's there. So look at all the stuff that Chiron in the third house will spark. Aries, Gemini, Aries third house, sparking here, sparking there, all over the place mentally. That's the gift of this Chiron transit in being able to lift this soul up. Now, I put some emphasis in relationships just because, again, of all these signatures by house and by signs, okay? Questions, comments from anybody? Third house, Pluto, Leroy, anything that has sparked for you?
No, you covered a lot. You covered a lot.
Put your headset on before you unmute yourself.
No, I've actually been multitasking on the board a little bit and with our new podcast. So forgive me for that.
Oh, that's okay. That's no problem. You know, I didn't speak much about the work thing. You know, second house, Pluto polarity point, natal Chiron there. You know, there's also an emphasis here, you know, really learning to be self-reliant in regards to career. I've never known anybody who works for Doctors Without Borders, and she, you know, she works in management and helping advise these doctors that go all over the world. And when I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, wow. I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. And I would say as Chiron transits through this third house, to the degree that she's working on all of her own self-healings, she could become the healer for these doctors. Think of the trauma that they go through in their work from, you know, little degrees to big degrees, wherever they go across planet Earth. She could really spark herself into being the de facto therapist for them, as well as attracting in whatever therapeutic work she may need for herself as well.
Good point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. You know, I just, well, again, I never, you know, beginning astrology goes, oh, well, does this sign match up with that sign? And then you get to be a Pluto astrologer and you're like, well, I need to, you know, meet and marry somebody who has Pluto in blah, blah, blah house. And I have to say, over the years, in, you know, relating to you, sweetie pie, I've really come to like third house. I like that that Gemini you know, third house energy, because it just, it can be so flexible and willing to change. And I think that's the real gift of Chiron in Aries transiting through the third house. Aries is active polarity, you know, and it's cardinal modality. Third house is active polarity, and it is mutable modality. You know, so there's a double signature here of Chiron going, I want to heal, I want to change, I want, you know, to do it differently. And that can be a good thing for an 8th house Pluto in Virgo, which is what I have. So there's, you know, there's signatures for hope with this transit of things being able to lighten up. So I would say to this volunteer, finish up the Piscean healing, take responsibility for yourself, and celebrate this transit through the third house and going, how can I shift and adapt in whatever way is possible, Source? All right. Any questions or comments, or we move on to our next example? I think I'm doing pretty good time-wise. Let me see. Not too bad. I'll try and speed up here. I'm going to take a drink first.
I might invite our next chart example to see if they can get mic'd, or I'm not sure if they'll be through. It looks like they're on the telephone. Looks like she's on the telephone. I'm wondering if she can join us with a USB headset or perhaps some earbuds on her computer. I'm not sure what your arrangements was exactly.
I know this volunteer has been on a lot of our webinars. I don't know if she's ever spoke up before. I'll start in as we look at Chiron and Aries transiting through the 4th house. I mean, you can work with her back and forth on the Q&A if you want to. All right, and you guys are welcome to interrupt me if she's live. I'll just be quiet and acknowledge. I mean, I'll acknowledge her and then move on. 4th house, of course, we have passive polarity, energy moving back to center. We have the cardinal modality, just like Aries, but this is the square to it. And of course, here's our 1st house of the water element dealing with the emotions. And of course, as Chiron and Aries moves through this 4th house, some of what we can have coming up to address. And by the way, if you have Chiron natally in the house, regardless of the sign, you're going to relate to these archetypes that I talk about. For example, if you have Chiron in Leo, but it's in the 4th house, or you have, Chiron in Sagittarius, but it's in the 4th house natally, you're going to relate to this stuff. So just know that this will work synergistically, even though we're going to emphasize the forecasting transit. But with this transit, that's going to bring up family of origin wounds in some way, and that may a major degree, maybe little degree. It can bring up ultimately feeling unloved by the universe. Source doesn't love me. I don't feel source. And then what we need to learn how to do, of course, is this is always about initiating self-love. Cancer 4th house is emotional self-reliance. I must love me first, and that's what Chiron is going to want to heal. And we'll also be learning to parent ourselves as we go from being children to being adults. Whatever the dysfunction is with the family of origin, ultimately as adults, we are responsible for learning how to love ourselves. This is the opportunities that Chiron will make conscious. And we can extend that out to recognizing a universal mother and a universal father. And so if we didn't receive the love we wanted from mother, what about universal mother? What is a universal mother like? What would the feminine energy of source be? How could it support you? What would the masculine energy of source be? How can that support you? So all along, those flavors or those archetypes will be coming up into consciousness with Chiron and Aries coming to the surface, Aries, in order to heal in some way. If we had supportive parents, it can be us learning to be supportive of others in the universe. We can carry that energy forward, whether we have children or not. One of my nicknames, I never had any bio kids. One of my nicknames was Mama Kim, because Mama Kim always mothers and nurtures everybody. I am babysitting a little 15-year-old puppy for a week while Roy's brother and his wife, they always go south a couple of weeks in the wintertime. And it turns out that the best place for JB is coming to Aunt Kimmy's house because she just loves him. So you can open up to that type of energy with this house transit, loving yourself enough that it just you want to love others, and healthy boundaries. I'm not saying you have to give yourself away.
Kim, I think we might have our
This is where we
here on the phone now. Let's see if her line's open.
Hello, I'm here.
Hello. Yes.
Hi, can you hear
Thank you.
me?
We hear you loud and
Great.
clear, sweetie.
Great.
All right. Okay, good. So we got that figured out. If you'll let me just go through this a little bit, then we'll move into your chart. Thank you.
Sure.
And so this transit is going to open us up to all the patriarchal distortions that have been passed along generation after generation along families. And so if you have this house transit, you can be reflecting upon how within your family of origin, your own parents have wounds and how those wounds were maybe conditioned on to you. And you can go about arresting those patterns. You can say, it ends with me. And whether you have children or not, if you have children, you can make your best effort to become more and more conscious of not projecting those patriarchal distortions onto the children, especially around love, nurturing, support. And if you don't have children, you can still go about trying to, arrest those old distortions of love patterns. You know, what's one of them that comes from so much, everybody knows this cliche. Children are meant to be seen, not heard. Roy and I were both raised with German fathers, and we both heard that growing up. How ridiculous is that? So, there's all kinds of examples, but all the distortions we have around giving and receiving love and family of origin can come another cycle or layer into consciousness, and we can be working to heal that. And I didn't talk about siblings with the third house. All of that stuff can come into it as well. Issues can come up with siblings, and you have to learn how to work with that. It can come up in the fourth house as well because of family of origin. So however those come up, this is going to be opening us up to honoring all the emotions. Just think about that. Aries and fourth house, Cancer house are square each other. And so Aries can just initiate all kinds of emotions coming up from negative to positive, and they just will spontaneously erupt and come out and come to the surface. Well, Chiron can want to help us make sense of it, understand it, and heal it. And so it's not about suppressing emotions with Chiron's transit through Aries in the fourth house. It's about letting them come up and express, and then understanding why we feel that way and what can I do to heal it to get to another level of emotional homeostasis with that. And then that helps us understand where those emotions are coming from, whether the family of origin or whether unique to us with past lives. Who knows? Time will tell. We talk about fourth house in Cancer having those two cycles, emotional withdrawal and animation. With Aries, we can have both of those operate. Chiron's transit through Aries will be going along fine. Boom, something happens, and it's like, leave me the fluff alone. And we'll want to crawl in that shell to be with ourself, Aries, to understand why we're angry or why we're hurt or why we're whatever. And that's okay. And as we get that understanding, then we come back out and we can go, I'm sorry, I needed to be able to process this. This is what happened. And then Chiron and Aries can also have that animation cycle going through. And we want to express those emotions. Again, we want to communicate them. We want to be able to get it up and out because that helps with the processing. Chiron's transit in Aries through the fourth house is going to bring up any wounds to our self-image, how we see ourselves. Now, is there any of us who doesn't feel wounded about ourselves? And that self-image can feel wounded spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physically. Chiron and Aries will bring it to the surface. And what can we do to improve that self-image? How can we improve it spiritually, connected to source? How can we heal it mentally? Creating those new mental affirmations. And then emotionally, of course. Well, how can we rebirth our self-image physically? All of those going all the way around. And then, of course, will be about evolving our home environment. Whenever it's a fourth house transit, there will be something that comes up about where we actually physically live and wanting the home environment to be safe, wanting to feel good in our home environment. Ultimately, it goes out to the spiritual level, homes where the heart is, being able to feel safe, whether we're in our home, being able to feel safe when we're in our world, being able to trust the environment, period, in all its many ways. Health and wellness, Cancer fourth house is the fluids of the body. It is all the containers of the body, the womb, the uterus, anything that we consider to be a container. The liver is a container, the spleen's a container. You can just think of all the different organs and glands in our body, even though other planets will have specific rulerships. This house transit will have rulership of containers. With Aries, Chiron in Aries, we can dry out, fire element Aries. So Chiron may have us opening up to recognizing what are healthy fluids. Are we just simply drinking enough water? Are we visualizing all the containers in our body? Fluid and flowing and processing, however they need to do so. Okay, this is not a be-all, end-all. Touching in, trying to spark things. And oh, by the way, as I mentioned in the first class, Jeffrey Wolf Green's unconsciousness reprogramming exercise, because we can do affirmations till we're blue in the face to heal consciously. We also have to work to heal unconsciously. I put that in the PDF to the first class, and I will have it as a PDF in all 6 of these classes. And I will show you the slides at the end here, so that no matter what your house transit is, if you want to make your own self-hypnosis tape to heal the unconsciousness, you've got the exercise in this PowerPoint slideshow. So again, I'll show you that at the ending. So here with this volunteer's chart, okay, older parents, serious health issues, but they're manageable. She has a good relationship with them. She lives really close to them. She has an older brother and a younger brother, but neither one live very close to the parents. She has struggled with some underemployment for several years, and in the last few years, she's become fully employed. So that's been able to shift things for her a little more positively. She lives alone. However, she's been in a 9-year relationship with someone who she described as being very soulful. And she's been recently, really working to improve her health. She has done it through an Ayurvedic diet. And she's now moving into some yoga and exercise to become stronger in those areas, to become stronger in the physical body. Briefly, what I'm going to point out here is, here's another 1966 baby, just after that 65 year when we had 3 Uranus Pluto conjunctions, Uranus, so is new phase Pluto. Here's Mars sandwiched right in here. Extremely tight Mars new phase conjunction to Pluto. This soul is initiating lifetimes with Pluto in the ninth house, Mars, new phase Pluto. In evolutionary astrology, we look at the 8 major aspects with Pluto to tell how many lifetimes we are working through those house lessons of that Pluto. New phase, crescent, first quarter, the gibbous sesquisquadrate, the full phase. You go through those 8 phases, and when Mars is in really fairly within a few degrees aspects to Pluto with those 8 phases, that gives you some idea of how many lifetimes they've been directly working on it. These are just minutes apart. And look at, right here, what I also want to draw in. Here is another, remember the previous chart was born a year later and Saturn had moved to Aries. Well, here's a tighter Uranus, Saturn conjunction to Uranus, both of them retrograde. Here we have a ninth house Pluto, Sag Sol with these oppositions right here. In this one, believe it or not, I don't know if you know this, volunteer, there are 9 aspects to Chiron. Every planet except the moon aspects Chiron. Ha! And you too have Jupiter in a sesquisquadrate to Chiron. It's applying. It's just getting ready to move out of first quarter phased and go into the gibbous phase, but it is a sesquisquadrate, okay, within 2 degrees. And then, of course, Chiron has all these trines to this stellium in Scorpio. Chiron in Pisces, Neptune rules by sign. Chiron in the 3rd house, Mercury rules by house. And there, your rulers of Chiron are conjunct each other by degrees, okay? So I can rattle away like I did this last one, but I know you've been studying astrology a little while, so I think I'd like to just open up to some feedback from you. You've had Chiron in the 4th house for a little while, even though it's been in Pisces. It's not in Aries yet. I'd like to just open up and see if you would like to describe your natal Chiron first for us. I can follow up with the transit if you want, but I guess I just would like to hear from you with this big, strong opposition in your chart. Do you have any comments, Chiron in the 3rd?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay, great. Well, first, I just want to thank you and Leroy for the amazing work that you do. And I related a lot to what you said with the 3rd house, because I've just been through that transit, and certainly listening to your podcast and your forecasting webinars has been a real like rock and foundation for me that just helped me be more balanced and sane in this world. So I really just want to thank you. And like I said, I did relate to a lot of what you said about the mental, gaining mental discipline, and that's really been my journey for, I would say, almost 10 years, as just trying to figure out how to take care of myself, how to be in the world, how to talk myself through things or feel my way through things. I don't, as to your specific question about Chiron, I'm not sure I know how to answer that. I guess the only thing I would say is I feel a real, you've talked in the past about those times in the 1960s with the civil rights and environmental movement, women's movement, all those different things. And I feel connected to that, like a calling to be part of the resurgence of that. And I experience, when I have transits around these stelliums and everything gets lit up, then I feel like a lot of power surging through my life, and so I'm trying to learn how to harness that and be a healer in my work, in my family and relationship.
Sure. Well, as you know, I have no problem talking Chiron in the 3rd house natally here. I'll give you some feedback, okay?
Great.
Well, first of all of you guys born in the middle 60s, as we say, each generation is born knowing what the generation before them had to learn and live through by the forecasting. So yes, this is not the first time around for you when you've been born into time periods that are quite turbulent and even wounding because of how distorted we are from natural law, 9th house, and how all kinds of distortions and tales and, let's just say, even outright lies get spun, and so when you see those distortions happening, you just feel it to the bone of your soul going, wait a minute, that's not truth. Literally to the point that you could have picked up, the sword in past lives, so to speak, or, you could have, been one of those out there in the masses, on the streets carrying your pot and pan, not the sword. And, just trying to speak up for that. And so as you've had this history of wanting to speak up for truth, and let me just take a moment here, because these planets are in a sextile relationship to the stellium. Okay, it doesn't look like it by house, but if you look at it by degrees from Virgo to Scorpio, you've got a gazillion sextiles going on here. And all this Scorpio 12th house, while it's possible early on you could have come in young, perhaps quite very quiet, or always pondering and searching. You may not have had your voice so much when you were younger. Okay. Mercury in the 12th house, again, all this stuff right here. Both of these, they're both water. Okay. So you feel it, but you may not have always expressed it as well when you were younger. But that psychology to search and question was there. And as time has gone by, one of the things for you to find was your voice with this natal Chiron signature, because what can be wounded with Chiron is sometimes even being afraid to speak up, not just the confused thinking, or frozen thinking, nervous thinking, suppressed thinking. Okay. Oh, I can't speak up. I don't know what I'm talking about. And as time has went by, as you've evolved in this lifetime, it's been recognizing, wait a minute, I do tap into that truth fairly well. And there is a messaging here to find this voice as time goes by. You also have Chiron sitting on the Pluto polarity point. tighter yet than the other chart example. So you have to heal the wounding of the voice. Your spiritual growth will give you more and more courage to speak. Now, that doesn't mean you necessarily have to be out in the street again, but you can if you want to. And it doesn't always mean you have to be speaking it out verbally. You can be writing it. You can be sharing it with others some way, but you do have to heal whatever's wounded about speaking out. And you've got to find your courage to speak out. And I would say as life goes on for you in this lifetime, there will be those time periods where you do have to find your voice, where you do have to speak up and call someone out if they're trying to spin a tale. Whether it's one-on-one relationships, whether it's in a work environment or whether it might be with, your spiritual friends, or whether it goes all the way out to some type of political or social basis in some way. All right. So this Chiron, the two rulers here, by sign and by house, being in the 12th house, okay, and being somewhat towards the end of the 12th house, especially, Mercury, 10 degrees from the ascendant, okay, and Mercury's retrograde, all right? Again, there's this feeling that if you speak up, you're going to be persecuted. This is what's happened in past lives. You either got locked up, okay, or you got persecuted. You got wounded and hurt in some way. And so this Chiron can be shy about speaking up. And Saturn new phase this Chiron is making you more and more conscious. You think it, but there can be doubt around Virgo, there can be doubt around speaking it. And these two planets retrograde are going, you can't be silent anymore. You can't be silent anymore. And this is just, year after year after year as you mature in this life. It's just going to keep coming up, keep becoming an issue. You've just had your Chiron return as well in the last few years. So there's been healing around this. So perhaps there's been some awareness coming of, wait a minute, I don't have to know the ultimate truth, but as I sense what is truth for me, part of my healing is to trust my own voice again. All right. Now you've had Chiron. Go ahead. Go ahead.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it will just be figuring out the specifics of how you do it, as Chiron's transiting into this 4th house and mom and dad get older, you're the female of the siblings. And you're the one who lives really close to mom and dad, but there may be some time periods with this 4th house transit that you're going to have to speak up to the brothers and say, I need help. How do you need help in some way? It'll still bring up some, family of origin issues to work through and to heal with, okay? So this 4th house transit, yes, may bring up some things around finding your voice in the family of origin. All right. 4th house opposes 10th house, career. You're going to continue to work on some self-reliance emotionally. so that if there's some way you need to speak up about how things need to change with work, you've got the courage to speak up to your coworkers and do that. I think Chiron may also bring up, you know, if it's not your own family of origin issues, you know, with mom and dad, there may be some ancestral lineage, okay, that can, you know, not specifically with mom and dad, but, you know, coming from being at ninth house Pluto with these signatures, coming from feeling wounded, Scorpio, and the rulers of Chiron here, Scorpio 12th, depth of spiritual wounding that has went on that you just didn't even recognize consciously. The fact that you got the transit through the 4th house, there's going to be emotional uprisings into consciousness. Around what? What's wounded with natal Chiron in the voice. It can bring up what's wounded with your soul's signature here. It can bring up what's wounded with the rulers of Chiron. There's just going to be emotional triggers or emotional memories that spontaneously, Aries, rise up to the surface, Aries, that Chiron says, let's take the time to emotionally understand this and emotionally heal this and find that deepening sense of emotional self-love, self-security. And then again, those will go right back to this finding my voice. I have deep things to say. I have understandings to speak up with. So you see how this transit, as it moves into Aries, right now finishing up in Pisces for another year, it's Pisces Cancer. You feel it, but it's still cocooning in. You might think it, you might sense it, but it's still cocooned. As it goes to Aries, 4th house, Cancer house, you can't keep it in anymore. It's got to come out some way. It must be emoted out. And with this transit related back to natal Chiron, the best way to emote it out is through the voice. So your thinking will continue to work to heal into clarity. All right. And then with that clarity, baby steps speaking it out, baby steps speaking it out. By the time you get to the end of that Chiron Aries transit and it goes into the 5th house, it could really start to have some effect in creativity and the evolution of work and career in some way. Not that it can't do it now with the polarity to the 10th. Make sense?
Yes, it does.
And so you're following how, even though we're working with this 4th house transit, it might bring up family issues, speaking up to the brothers with mom and dad aging. It also is just going to work with you establishing that emotional wholeness and healing to then, you know, emote outwards. And emote outwards with the voice relative to this natal signature here. You won't get locked up anymore for speaking up.
Good.
Not really. Questions with what I'm saying? I mean, are there any questions arising as we go through this? Questions from the board as well, Leroy. Anything there? You speak up for me. Thank you.
Well, I think what came up for me is through my work in my organization, we're going through some healing work around race and gender. And
do you mind sharing a little more about your employment?
Sure. I work for a social change organization, and my role is to be a coach to social change leaders for a whole year. My organization raises the money so they don't have to pay. And so it's very rewarding and amazing work. And there's always a deep...
Would you share, I'm sorry to interrupt, would you also share what part of the country you're in? You don't, only specific to the degree you want, but what part of the country are you in? Are you in a metropolitan area?
Yes, I'm in a metropolitan area, right in Washington, D.C.
Oh, and you're in the heat of it.
Yeah, and I'm working more on the local level. There's a whole lot that goes on here in Washington, D.C. that you know, we don't hear about on the national level. And you know, there's, in a way, the city is very segregated, and so I'm a white person, so I am constantly learning and understanding more about what race is and isn't, how it's actually was created as a social construct for control purposes. And so I feel like I feel exactly what you were saying, that I'm moving into this space of figuring out what is my voice in this. You know, I think everybody, no matter their race or gender, can have a role in making change happen. And so learning how to do that. And I am learning how to talk to my coworkers, my boss, and so and I'm learning to trust myself and not think, well, I have to be like somebody else. You know, I can learn how to do this in a way that is genuine to me.
Good for you. Good for you. Because, you know, as we're looking at Chiron transiting through this fourth house, of course, it's ruled by the moon. The moon's the only planet that's not aspecting Chiron. And I didn't go look for the degrees, although, you know, it's about, 7 degrees from a sextile. Chiron Capricorn second, you know, this can be, you know, you're deeply emotional. And you got the South Node here in Scorpio as well. So there will be time periods where you get to that emotional limit and whew, watch out, the sword comes out. But this emotional nature, you know, it's a lot, you know, this would add to the emotional shutdown early on. And you know, moon's in the opposite sign of its rulership. So sometimes you've got to really sit on something emotionally and ponder it with this double earth signature to kind of get in touch with where you are emotionally. This Chiron transit through the fourth house in Aries is going to quicken it. You're going to get in touch with yourself emotionally faster and faster. You could have had some emotional suppressions in past lives in order to be safe and secure. And as you're working with deepening and healing this emotional self-reliance, you're going to get more secure emotionally, and it's going to quicken those emotions, and they're just going to spark out when you see or sense injustice. And relative to the natal third house Chiron, you're going to be evolving your communication skills at speaking up as you sense it. You can get that emotional spark of where there is something that is not right, where there is a social injustice, and you know, you're going to raise your hand, excuse me, I need to give some feedback here. And, you know, you can be initiating a stronger and stronger voice relative to this natal signature as you gain more and more emotional self-reliance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you've got it, you know, contained within yourself to some degree, but you've got to learn how to express this energy again. And Chiron and Aries can initiate it. I mean, I don't know if you saw part 1 where we went through the archetypes and cycles, but when I listed all those things, the last time Chiron was in Aries, 1968 to 1977, you know, yes, it was the middle of the 60s that you were born into with all the social injustices, but Chiron in Aries was just a part of, it was as much a part. I was amazed at all the social stuff that came out with Chiron in Aries. The violence did with the, you know, Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy and Black Panthers and all the, you know, university uprisings, you know, but that was also Chiron in Aries going, I'm not going to sit by the wayside anymore. I'm going to be involved with initiating what needs to change. So relative to your karmic dynamic and your evolutionary intent, it's been there in the past, it's been wounded, and it's going to be coming out. And so do that emotional work, do that, you know, do the emotional healings, however those emotions spark. And then again, that's just going to help you speak out. Now, what I didn't put in the chart that I guess I could have, but I'm just going to speak up for, I'm just going to say it for everybody. You have the asteroid Pallas Athena at 2 degrees Aries retrograde. Yes, it's 1 degree 50, and Chiron goes retrograde at 225 Aries. You're going to have Chiron over your natal Pallas Athena 3 times this year. Pallas Athena is the social justice warrior. You've got it in Aries. You've got it retrograde. It falls right in with this wide stellium. So now Chiron's going to activate it here. You're going to figure out how to be involved. I'm going to guess it's going to more fully activate you in work, and you work for a social change or whatever you said, organization. But it might lead you even more out into that work. Beyond, it will lead you into that even more beyond work. It could also perhaps have you wanting to further educate yourself in some way. This dynamic with natal Chiron in 3rd, 9th, as Chiron in Aries transits over again the asteroid Pallas Athena, 2 degrees Aries. There's an initiation coming with Chiron here. And if it might feel like you want to further your education in some way, you could. We'll see how it unfolds, huh?
Yeah. Could I ask about what you see for like an intimate relationship? So I have this long-term relationship, and I can also give you a whole lot of reasons why we don't live together. We haven't gotten married that are like, I think, you know, surface things. But deep down, it feels like we just haven't been ready. So I'm just curious what you see as far as that.
Give me a little more information. And by the way, your asteroid Juno, the asteroid of relationships, is up here, 11 degrees Leo, okay, conjunction to Jupiter, and a separating sesquisquadrate to Chiron. So the asteroid Juno, the asteroid of relationships, aspects Chiron as well. Give me a little more environmental conditioning, okay? What's going on? Whatever you feel comfortable sharing.
Sure. So we both are very focused on our careers. He's a musician. He does, in a sense, social change work also. He's been the caretaker for his father, who passed away about 6 months ago. And so he also went through taking care of his mother when he died, and a previous girlfriend when she died. And then he's had literally in the last few years, like 30 people in his life die. So he has a lot there, and he lives on the other side of town from me. And I live, like you said, close to my parents. So and I'm increasingly, involved in helping them figure things out so they can age in place. And he travels a lot. He's very involved with, he has like 5 things in the 7th house. In Pisces, he's very involved with lots of different networks, and also like forging a career, like creating a career path that didn't really exist before.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I just moved a little bit farther away from him because it was just too expensive where I was living. And so it's almost like we have a long distance relationship, even though we live in the same city.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I appreciate you being able to give me a little bit of feedback there, okay? All right.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll look at this, all right? Anytime Saturn is retrograde, there is going to be issues around authority figures. And the Chiron conjunction, Saturn, new phase, Chiron, there's wounding around authority. There's wounding around losing your authority. Chiron or Saturn in Pisces, these are people who they really have to be grounded because their structure of consciousness, Saturn, is etheric. Pisces, they're floating around all over the place. And every so often the universe comes along and gives the psychic or physical 2x4 to get them in a body. Okay? But there's wounding here with authority. All right? And you look at this Scorpio 12th house signature. As I'm listening to you, the intuitive hit I got right here, oh my gosh, making a serious commitment to someone, I will disappear. I won't have any sense of who I am anymore. And so even though you can look at this, woundedness with authority as maybe coming with work and career, somewhere in the family origin, you've got a trine to all of these planets, all right? And so what I'm sensing is trine. It's just easy to relate to an intimate partner more in the etheric plane than all of that messiness of day-to-day living. Got that? You following me in regards to
that
this
makes a
right
lot
here?
of sense.
Yeah, and also the sesquisquadrate up here to Juno in Leo at 11 degrees. It's, oh my gosh, if I make a commitment to someone, I'll just lose myself. I'll lose all my freedoms. So there's a responsibility you have to take for attracting in what I call the unavailable partner. So you want little doses, and of course, not to mention a 9th house Pluto and all this, right here. I need my freedom, or I need to be in absolute control. You know, so you have a fear of losing a sense of self and a fear of losing control with intimate partners. And, you know, talk about chironic excuses. Third house can be excuse making. You know, you just listed off so many things with him, and I'm writing them down, and I'm going, but if they really wanted to be in an intimate relationship, we all have stuff going on. We all have stuff with parents going on. Leroy and I still have 4 parents in their 80s, you know, juggling all that. Everybody juggles career and relationships. So, Chiron in Aries can be opening up a deepening of that emotional self-reliance so that you don't have to feel secure, isolated. You can have enough security within yourself that you can commit without losing yourself. That's a lesson for you. To be able to have intimate commitment and not lose your power is a lesson.
Yeah, that's a big one.
And of course, you know, the more emotionally secure inwardly, 4th house, the more emotionally self-reliant we are, the less we need it from out there. The more we supply it in here, you know, the more that we can then risk being an intimate relationship. You know, as Jeffrey Green's teachings, you know, have said, there's no guarantee in intimacy, 8th house Scorpio. You know, the ultimate risk, you know, the partner dies. So, you know, and here's Cancer on this 8th house cusp as well, you know, so there's a vulnerability around committing. I'm okay if I'm just out here taking care of myself and I have a long distance relationship. So there's an uncovered woundedness here with this Chiron signature and its rulers being Scorpio 12th. So deepening that relationship with Source, of course, is right here. Doing that, it's then stepping up to the plate in your own power and recognizing a commitment means I'm not going to disappear from the universe.
Well, I think you hit it on the head.
Okay. Any other? Oh, you're most welcome. It's a pleasure to be able to connect with you. I know we do email, you know, every so often, but pleasure to speak to you. And any other questions? And
no, thank you so much.
All right, well, we're ending the time. I want to thank you for volunteering your chart, and I want to thank our 3rd house transit volunteer as well for volunteering. And I want to check in with Leroy and just see if there might be any questions or comments on any of these house transits from the board in any way.
Pretty quiet. Very quiet.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, I'm starting to get into my flow. So for all of you who are showing up for the live series, I think I got my slides down. I again do appreciate my volunteers here very, very much. Again, putting out a call, if any of you find some nice feminine centaurs, they didn't exist in mythology, but that doesn't mean Chiron and Aries, we can't initiate some. Email me some photos. Again, most of them are just being blatantly sexual. And, you know, yeah, I can show you that, but I'd rather show some more empowered femininity that doesn't have to go in one direction. And of course, here's my invocation that I created for myself 20, 30 years ago. Spirit of God, Goddess, come through me. Mind of God, Goddess, speak through me. Heart of God, Goddess, love through me. Body of God, Goddess, I am. May this be your Chiron and Aries invocation through anything that you are experiencing or sensing or thinking or not understanding in your own Chiron Aries transits. We'll go through the 5th and 6th house next Monday night. I want to say I have a volunteer and her transit will work for either 5th or 6th. So I'm still in need of 5th or 6th house. I'm still in need of a second volunteer. So if you know anybody, appreciate if you'd be enrolled. If I don't get a volunteer, I'm going to use a public figure. And then Wednesday, we'll do the 7th and 8th houses, followed by one more week. And then I'm going to do Mercury retrograde, March 19th. And that'll be followed by a Uranus in Taurus series that will go pretty much the same as this Chiron Aries series, 2 parts going. Now, excuse my burps. Here is Jeffrey Wolf Green's unconsciousness reprogramming exercise. I kind of expanded upon it over the years. I'm not going to read this. I just want to put it into the PowerPoint slideshow so that you have got this in print if you would like to create this exercise and do it for yourself. And again, it is to reprogram the wounds and traumas of the unconsciousness, making them conscious in order to heal. All right, that's all of my slides for tonight. So again, thank you to both of our volunteers and thank you to all of you who desire to study with Leroy and I shall see you next week, Monday and Wednesday night. Good night, everyone.